Okay, so welcome to another episode of Scaling Up Experts, brought to you by Mount Royal University's Growth Catalyst program. We explore the latest practices that help Canadian business leaders scale up their businesses and delve deeper into the 7 scaling strategies with subject matter experts. A little bit of news about the Growth Catalyst program. So this is actually led by Mount Royal University's Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and is an intensive executive program that helps business leaders and ambitious owners spark the creation and set the foundation for executing a growth strategy. The program is funded by Alberta Innovate's Ecosystem Development Partnership Program, Prairie's CAM Regional Innovation Ecosystem Program, and the TD Ready Commitment. We also have Kathy and Bruce Williams as well on board, which we're delighted by. And to learn more about the program, go to growthcatalyst.ca. Apply today. We have 6 more cohorts that we're recruiting to over the next 2.5 years. We'd love you to be a part of that story. I want to introduce today's speaker and a little bit of information about the session. So today's session focuses on the scaling up strategy of capability. The capability is all about defining things like operating models to enable scale. Operating models focus on things like people, culture, process, systems, technologies, things that help you get that stuff done, that becomes repeatable, reliable, scalable in organizations. And it tends to be one of the hardest things to do. Our special guest today is Nick Thompson. He's the best-selling author of Look Out, You're About to Get F. We won't use the word that it actually says on the front of his book, because I know some of you will be watching this during the day and not after twilight hours. The 13 pitfalls of business and how to avoid them. So Nick explores these 13 pitfalls. I'm delighted that we're going to be exploring some of these today. A little bit about Nick before we move to Nick and actually ask him some questions about this particular publication. Nick aims to bring a new approach to image management, culture development, and strategic enterprise growth as a co-founder and president of several companies, including Metro Media Marketing, Brand Alliance, and the VEA Office Professionals, Inc. Nick now shares his 25+ years experience. We're in safe hands with Nick of leadership and executive management experience with business owners and professionals across North America. Nick spearheaded organizations that became internationally recognized. So just so you're aware, he's been listed as best places to work by the Counselor magazine, as well as gaining the coveted National Distributor of the Year award by the Promotional Products Professionals of Canada. He also obtained Deloitte's prestigious Canada's Best Managed Companies distinction several years in a row. So that's fantastic. So there's many great business books, and I know, Nick, you've written one in particular, but a lot of these business books share best practices, business models, new ways of structuring systems and processes, corporate culture development, and lots of other things. And I know that you've enthusiastically used many of these to start and grow a number of businesses. However, what you share in your book that you're going to share with us today is that a lot of them tell you not what went wrong in business, but what went right. And so this is an opportunity to actually peer into failure and to learn from failure and those instances that can seriously F you. So I want to welcome Nick to the virtual stage. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'm wondering whether we can just start by you telling us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. Like, tell us where it all started and tell us how you got to then writing this book.
Great, thank you. It's a long story, so I'll try and keep it short for all of your purposes. I did want to say, first of all, I'm sorry I can't be there live on the day. I would have loved to have met everyone, and we might have an opportunity in the future to do that. My story started when my parents and I actually bought a very small marketing company here in Calgary. It was back in 1996, and I was the 5th employee. My parents said, we'll fund the purchase of the company, but the idea is you're in marketing, and that's what I went to college for, one of the things I went to college for. You're in marketing, we're going to look at this marketing company. We would like to retire in a few years, and you could buy us out, and that'll be our retirement plan. So in 96, I became the 5th employee of this small promotional marketing company in Calgary. And in 2000, they said, hey, let's trigger the buyout, and away we went. Once 2000 came along and I took over the company, I worked all the positions, of course. We managed to scale that company from 5 employees, about just over $1 million in gross revenue, one location here in Calgary, to in 2015, we had 350 employees, 20 locations across North America, warehousing on 5 different continents, and had broken the $100 million gross revenue barrier. So in 15 years. Now, I tell you that not to brag that we did so well. The importance is we used the same concepts that you're learning in the Growth Catalyst program. So I'm a great believer in what you're doing, and certainly you have a lot of tools available to you to do the same thing. Now, and of course, all of this material and these great books we read, and we implemented a bunch of these fantastic concepts in order to gain that growth. In 2015, we merged with another company, actually a US company that was consolidating the industry in the US, the same we were doing here in Canada. We had acquired about, between 2010 and 2015, we acquired another 20 companies in our industry. So we were sort of eating up and consolidating what is known as a very small company industry. So we did the same, and we merged with a company in the US, and looked all fine and dandy until we got into working together at a deeper level. And then things started to fall apart. And so a lot of the story I tell is related to, one of my, I would say, my greatest successes turned into one of my greatest failures. And after years of looking at myself in the mirror, understanding that there was no place to put the blame but myself, as the founder and the chair of the board into that merge, I realized that, I made a lot of these decisions, and yes, we didn't get into bed with the right people, but I made the decision to do so. So I can't blame anybody but myself. And so there's a whole bunch of lessons that came with that. The story is intertwined throughout this book. And what I realized at the time, so this is now 2017, a very tumultuous exit from the company. I basically decided to leave because I didn't like what they were doing with the people. And in 2020, early 2020, they completely went bankrupt across the globe, and they no longer exist. So some people might say, hey, don't you feel vindictive, Nick? Like, you were right. They were doing the wrong thing. And I'm like, sure, but they also killed my baby. So you can imagine how that feels. Something it's going to be very difficult to get over the rest of your life. In the course of that, I was doing business coaching throughout, mentoring as well as had incubated a number of other companies in there. So I decided to move over to those interests as well. So that's kind of the very quick story on the entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, it's much more in depth in the book.
Thanks a lot, Nick. And the openness and that you just use really to share your story is impressive. And I know that the book has a lot of those insights around those pitfalls. You mentioned about the business being a baby. I mean, we come across this time and time again with business owners that we work with, that there's a lot of emotion that's bound to the business. You've grown it from an early stage venture, you've built that business, and there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears invested in it, as well as your own personal finances, etc. So it's a hard process, and loss, identity, all those different things get bundled up in there. So thank you for sharing, what is obviously something which a lot of business owners fail with, sharing around failure and challenge. And I know that we'll be the best of it for hearing your story. So often we hear about the successes in business, but we don't get to hear also about how this could have happened. So in terms of writing the book, obviously writing a book is not a small thing to do. So tell us a little bit about, what you wanted to focus on in the book, and what it actually would be, what would be the experience that the reader would have by connecting with the book.
Great, thanks for asking. As you mentioned, I'm an avid reader of business books, and I'm got a whole bookshelf here and in another room, and I certainly enjoy all the great thought leaders of our time, you know, the Simon Sineks and Jim Collins, and I mean, James Clear, the list goes on. And definitely an avid reader of those and listener. And I like to implement what I resonate with the most. The as you mentioned, and I do mention this somewhat in the book, is they talk about incredible thought processes, new types of processes you can put into play, new types of models and execution ideas and culture building. And I love them all. I think there's some fantastic material, and they're definitely worth investigating and looking at what resonates with you the most. What I realized over time is that there was no material on, hey, by the way, here are all the dangers of business. Here are all the things to look out for, the things that could creep up behind you and grab you while you're implementing such great concepts. And I thought, hey, I might be onto something here. So I started looking, and I could not find any material on, you know, here are all the dangers of business. Of course, it's not a feel-good story, right? Like a lot of these books are, hey, this is, you know, motivating, and it pumps you up and it gets you out there to create some action, which is what we need. This is not a feel-good book. This is a, here are the dangers. Look out. Red cover, sharks circling, swear words, which I don't typically swear a lot. But it's really just to grab attention and say, these things could seriously hurt your business. I have personally dealt with many of these pitfalls, and I have stories of my own in regards to each of those 13 pitfalls. But I've also investigated and collected stories from other entrepreneurs and other businesses and media, TV, news, that coincide with the pitfalls, to say, hey, it wasn't just me. These are serious things that happen to a lot of companies out there if we're not careful. So the whole reason for putting the book together was I really just want to look. I'm not going on a big speaker tour. I'm not, you know, trying to get in front of big audiences and that sort of thing. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose is I love business. I love entrepreneurs. I believe solely. Doctor, you came with a statistic about how many companies are under $1 million. I believe it was like 95% that you had that you spoke about. I mean, it's a serious part of our economy, and so I believe heavily in it. And I just want to get the story out to say, hey, hopefully you can learn the same lessons without going through the pain of learning that I had to go through. Right? It's much easier to learn from other people's mistakes. So that's the reason I wrote this.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nick. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the stats don't lie. There's a significant amount of failure in the early stages of business development. You have to put a lot of businesses in the top of that funnel at the startup phases to actually get businesses through to small and medium. So where we're working with the Growth Catalyst program is focusing on those small, medium companies that have that potential to achieve that next growth episode, that substantial exponential opportunity. So yeah, super excited to be working in that space, and thanks for sharing that background. What I'm really intrigued to do though is to get into some of these pitfalls.
Great.
So you know, you've got us all salivating on the end of this virtual webinar. So what would be, you know, one or two key pitfalls that you would say really rise to the surface? I know the book refers to 13 of them, and we'll obviously go and get the book and dig into 13. But if you were to say that one or two, and perhaps with when you're mentioning that one or two, whether you can give a bit of a description and example of actually what that refers to.
Sure. I'll maybe go through some of my favorites. I do put them in a little bit of an order in the book. I start out with culture. Because I don't believe that I'm a very, very strong believer, and I've experienced it on both sides of the coin, that in order to build a company, we need to build our people. And to me, that is a very simple concept that a lot of companies don't get. And so I do start with culture and the famous quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I go through how to help build a good culture. And all the cultural stories, good and bad, that have been out there, and including my own. But I'm not going to go there. I know you speak a lot in your course about building culture and process. So I do start with that as number one because I believe it's the biggest foundation for the success of business. What I will go to is a few of my favorites. Pitfall number two is Freud warned you about ego. And what happens is, and I remember getting into business. In fact, when I first joined Entrepreneurs Organization, it was the year 2000. And my dad was retiring. And he said to me, hey, Nick, remember you're a small fish in a big pond, and always keep that in mind, that you're never too big for your britches as you grow. And I really took that to heart. And what I've noticed in business throughout, and I always thought of myself as I don't have a big ego. I'm okay with feedback. I'm okay being vulnerable as I am, in the book and here talking to you. But what ends up happening is when you start to experience success and growth, and then you have your suppliers are kind of pumping your tires and saying you're great, and you're, those staff that really like you, they're pumping your tires, and competition are saying, what are you doing right? That ego can creep in pretty easily, and you don't realize it until it's in, saying, hey, we're pretty darn good. And so I've got a bunch of stories, my own story in there about ego, and also some other stories in there to show about ego. One is Tin Cup. If you recall the movie Tin Cup, Bull Durham, I believe, was his name, and he was playing golf, and so that's Kevin Costner, right? And if you remember the story, I'll leave it there. I'll let you read about it, but it's a lot to do with ego. He thought, I'm going to keep going because I know I can make this and be the hero. I want to be the hero story. And he ended up really bottoming out because of his ego. So that's one of my favorite ones, to kind of slap ourselves in the face a little bit, give ourselves a reality check. We're still human. My dad said, you cut anyone, they still bleed the same color, treat everybody the same, that sort of thing. And that stuck with me throughout. So that's a favorite one. Another favorite one of mine is pitfall number 3, which is everyone believes they deserve what you have. Everyone believes they deserve what you have. And what happens as you're growing your business, people start to see, you might start to see some success, start to see some, hey, we're getting some more resources. Your suppliers will see the success and say, I want to charge you more because obviously you can afford it more. Your clients will say, obviously you're charging me too much because I can start to see this growth and success. And your staff will look and say, I want more of that piece of the pie. Why are you getting it all? In fact, there's you'd be surprised to learn that there are so many of your staff actually believe that every penny your company makes in gross revenue goes to your pocket. They actually believe that. And so without some education behind funds and profits and gross margins and that sort of thing, they believe that you're taking the lion's share off the table and you're just feeding them the scraps. And they will look at, how can I get more of this piece of the pie? So everyone believes they deserve what you have is something that's real in business as you're growing. And you need to manage the perspectives, as well as educate everyone on what profitability is and why it's so important to business. It's not a dirty word. We need it so that we can grow and reinvest in our business. So really important that all parties understand about how your financials work on a high level, right? So that's another one of my favorites. I will tell you that the 2 other ones, I'll give you my very top learning as a last one. How about that? Pitfall number 6 is death by accounting. I work with lots and lots of different entrepreneurs, executives, business owners, executive teams. And what it sort of bubbles up to the top when we're talking about the business is there's not a great level typically of financial literacy by the owners and the executives. Oh, I have a CFO that takes care of that, or I have a bookkeeper that does the books, or I have an accountant that does all that. I just look at the number at the end of the year, right? What's that bottom number? And that's dangerous, really, really dangerous. It's dangerous for a number of reasons. Number one, it's dangerous because you don't know if somebody's ripping you off throughout the course of a year, right? And I've got lots of stories about that. I had a bookkeeper that committed fraud in the early days of the first company mentioned, Metro Media, in the tune of over $100,000 of our profit, and they leaked it out over time. And I would have never believed it in a million years, because I believed she was like my sister, and we were pretty tight, but believed that she deserved more, and therefore started to skim. But the only reason I caught it is because over time, I'm looking at some anomalies in the financials on a monthly basis, and I'm saying something's not adding up, and I was able to investigate it and catch it. We never know. So that's one sort of danger of what I call death by accounting. The other one is we can get ourselves in a cycle of growth. Listen, I'm going through this right now in my current business, which is VEA Office Professionals. We implemented a ton of new things this year. We got really enthusiastic. We said, we're growing fast. We grew 250% last year. That's amazing. Let's get some more resources, put some more processes in place. We got people working on projects. Now, all year, and it's been great. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. This is now in place. Hey, look, everyone, right? Now we're looking and going, whoops. And I know this stuff, right? Whoops, we have no cash flow because we got too enthusiastic and started spending money too quickly because of that growth. So now we're growing into this period where we're like, uh-oh, we need to level that off, right? So if we don't have a good financial literacy and we're doing, we're looking at our financials and we're doing budgets and we're comparing on a monthly basis, right? I don't recommend quarterly. I recommend monthly, especially as we're growing our businesses, so that we can make quicker, more efficient decisions for our business, so we don't start to get into danger, throughout. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they say, end of the year, I get my financials, I look at the bottom line, and that's how, and then I've had people say, I just take the bottom line, that's my income. I'm like, ooh, that's probably not a great sustainable theory to uphold your business for the next number of years. So death by accounting is a big one for me. My favorite, or I would say, wouldn't say favorite, it was my biggest lesson. Why don't I say that? My biggest lesson is what I call in the book, it's chapter 10, which is called Success is the Devil's Disguise. And what I mean by that is, obviously we all strive for our own form of success. What I mean by that is, once it's part and parcel with that ego story, once we start to get successful and feel like we're doing really well and we're checking all the boxes, we're doing all the things, implementing all the right processes and things that we learn through this course, and we start to feel pretty good about things. And I got to a point myself where I felt like I could do no wrong. I'm like, every time I make a decision, it just seems to turn out really well for us. And people would come and say, hey, give me some advice. You seem to know what you're doing. And I'm like, do I? I think so, but I seem to be making the right. Then I get into my own head and instead of seeing, and I know looking back now, those long, hard looks in the mirror, I'm like, oh, I saw a red flag there, but I ignored it because I said, look at all these awards we're winning. Look at all this growth we're having. Look at all the success we're having. That's just a little red flag. I can ignore that because this is way more pretty, right? It's way more fun. We're celebrating. We're having big success parties and everybody's really enjoying work. Everybody, like 350 people really enjoying their work. And I get such a kick out of that. I started to ignore some red flags. And so the biggest lesson I learned through the whole thing is if I would have seen those red flags and dealt with them, I don't think at the end of the day, I would have been walking away from a company and watching it crumble. So the biggest lesson that I've ever had to date is beware the hubris. I did not know the meaning of the word hubris up until this instance. And hubris is being overconfident, having enough confidence that you're overlooking some things. And so that was my biggest lesson of my career at this point, of my business life. So success is the devil's disguise. That one hits home really, still really hard for me, to not ignore red flags, listen to the gut, watch, plan, be appropriate. Success is amazing, but always balance it out with how can I make sure it's sustainable, and how can I make sure that we are still working on all of the issues that are constant in business, right? So there's a bunch of my favorites.
Yeah, and I think you've struck a lot of points that I know the listeners today will be sort of reflecting themselves, sitting in their offices, sort of listening to you talk about these issues that you uncovered and surfaced, I guess, as a result of your reflection and introspection process. Within the program, we work with leaders on this notion of coach. That's one of the 7 scaling strategies. And you've really touched base on how important it is to be aware of yourself, how you show up every day, and the impact that has and that approach has on others, not just in your immediate team, but across the organization. So we often find that business owners and leaders are hugely passionate individuals. You naturally get engagement from staff as a consequence of that. But is that aligned with where the organization needs to go, and not getting caught up in all the excitement of growth, but also doing some of the basic things that you talked about, like commerciality? One of the stats I know that we shared the other day was, or this notion as well of being patient for growth, but impatient for profit. It comes from Christian Clayton, and a big part of the research, where they've studied now 650,000 businesses across the world. And what they find time and time again is that growth, and particularly sustainable growth, doesn't come from a position where you're already in a loss-making position. You cannot prioritize growth beyond profits. Those businesses that outperform growth and profitability in the long run need to start from a position of profitability. And so this need to look at your own finances and help others understand what that looks like in an organization is clearly important. And I think you've given some really good examples of that. So thanks for being so open with us and sharing some of those pitfalls. And I'm excited to dig a bit deeper, and I know those online today listening in are looking forward to getting your book too. So tell us a little bit. You obviously mentioned about the VA office solutions that you're working on now, and that you're achieving significant growth. I'm quite intrigued to know, where's that growth coming from? Like, how are you going about achieving the sort of 250% growth? Because that's sort of hyper growth territory, not just high growth territory. And it's quite difficult for the organization to keep pace with the development of systems and processes and other things in the organization when you're experiencing that kind of revenue growth. So yeah, excited to hear what's going on now and how you're protecting against some of these pitfalls happening again.
Yeah, and I think that, thank you. And I want to say one thing. Your quote about be patient for growth and impatient for profits was my favorite quote of the whole day. And had I not published this book yet, I probably would have asked you if I could actually put that in my book, because I think that one statement is so powerful on how we run our businesses, that there's so much that you can flush out from that one statement. So thank you for gifting me with that quote. So we VEA Office Professionals it's a virtual executive assistant and bookkeeping company. We started in 2016, kind of recognizing the need that things were going more virtual when it came to staffing. And in particular, having been involved with the Entrepreneurs Organization for about 22 years now, seeing that people, in order to scale, people were having one of their biggest issues is when you get to this certain level of, when do I hire the next person? Do I bite the bullet and hire them and hope to grow into that, covering that expense? Or do I grow into that expense, which means, I'm not up to here, I'm up to here in work. Do I grow so that I can actually afford a person. And it's a big stepping stone for entrepreneurs, that, you know, jumping those next level with staff. And so we got the idea through small business, through EO, and said, well, maybe we should look at this new virtual world of staffing, where we could provide, so two categories at the moment. We're looking at launching a third service next year, but EAs in particular. So I know that one of the best hires I ever made back in the early days was I hired an assistant, and I could offload, you know, you do this, you do this, you do this, so I can concentrate on the business plan and looking at new markets and growing the business, and looking at new ways of delivering our services. And I know it was one of the best hires I ever made. So here we are saying, well, we could be that to people, the best hire they ever made. But hiring a full-time person is expensive in the early days, right? So we said, well, maybe we could do it on a fractional basis, a virtual fractional basis. So we started looking into that model. There are more companies doing that now. And we decided that we didn't want to be an offshore company where you could hire somebody that works out of the Philippines and you pay, quite frankly, it's inexpensive. It's good. It's 12 to 16 bucks an hour and you can get tasks done. We wanted to be more integrated. We wanted experienced people that knew business in North America, that could actually be a partner, like the right arm to that executive or that entrepreneur, to say, hey, I've worked in corporations before. Why don't you try this? This worked for another owner. Like, be a partner. And so we created what's called a dedicated model. So that means that you're matched with somebody based on personality, core values, time, the way you like to communicate, etc. We have a big process for that. And they are an extension, they work for you. So you develop a relationship like you would with any EA. It's just virtually. You spend a lot of time on the phone, Zoom calls, that kind of thing. And there's sort of a minimum of 20 hours a month. That's all that's required. So you can scale that, right? Like, oh, I have more things, I can scale it up. Oh, you know, I can scale it down if that's necessary. So it allows their flexibility to have this virtual fractional staff. And then we were asked, well, do you do bookkeeping too? Well, no, we don't, but it would be an easy, synergy. So we looked into that, and then we started up, it was only a year after, we started up the bookkeeping division. No minimum hours, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't need 20 hours a month of bookkeeping. Really, they only need sort of 5 to 10 hours a month until they hit a certain size. So there are no minimums there, so that we can help them scale, and their bookkeeper can scale with them. So we liked the model, we implemented the model, it started growing fast. It really resonated, certainly with entrepreneurial community. We do have some larger companies we work with that use 5 of our EAs and 4 of our bookkeepers, but typically it's the entrepreneurial world that we work with. It seemed to hit home, and 99% of the growth was all referral. And we did take advantage of the CanEx grant with the government. We took advantage of that in 2020 because we said, I have no idea what COVID's going to do to us, not a clue. So let's look at how we can expand into the US as well, a lucrative market, lots more businesses, to see if we can diversify our clientele a little bit. So that went well. And then we were growing quite fast, and we said, look, we're still implementing all of our favorite best practices from all these thought leaders, but now let's also look at the pitfalls that we're developing so that we can mitigate against all 13 of those pitfalls. So I do have sections in every one of those pitfalls to say, here are tips to avoid getting effed by those pitfalls, so that if you implement this type of thinking, this type of mindset, these tools, some of these processes, is more so a mindset than anything, you can help avoid those. So we implemented those into our business as well, so that we could continue to grow. As I said, transparently, we were so enthusiastic about our growth that we are starting to look at our cash flow now and say, we don't want to fall into one of those pitfalls. So now we need to, scale back on some of the processes. I'll tell you one thing we're doing, and I do mention it in the book, and this comes from 3 entrepreneurs out of Europe. And I heard this story about flowering season. And so what they did is they discussed what gardening was like compared to running a business, and that you invest in watering and soil maintenance and fertilizing, and you grow the plants in the spring. And then when they start to flower and you start to see the beauty and get to appreciate all the flowers of the business, you don't start putting as much energy. You just sit back and enjoy it for the summer. And then it's maintenance after that. And they said, that's what we believe we should be doing in business. Have a growth period and then stop and have a flowering period. You enjoy your business, enjoy the success, and take some time to sit back and say, are our processes ready for the next growth season? Do we have things ready? Or do we have the people in place, the processes in place, so that we can go into the next growth season and then start preparing for that? So they had this theory that if you do it in stages, it would be more manageable, and you're doing it by plan. So I just put out a communication a couple of weeks ago to all of our people. We have about 75 people from coast to coast right now. And I said, guess what? Mid-November, we're going into flowering season. And they all know what that means, right? It means we're gonna start putting clients on a wait list. We're gonna let everybody enjoy the holiday season without all the onboarding that we're typically going through on a monthly basis. And then we're gonna just take some time to settle in and say, are our processes that we've put into place this year ready for our next, or do we keep that wait list going for a little longer and just take a pause and enjoy where we are? So that we've put that into place in the last couple of years, and it seems to really work well.
Fantastic, Nick. Yeah, you've really struck a chord with a lot of the things that I know that we're speaking to in the program, and your lessons learned are really ripe for others to take advantage of. So thank you for sharing those. Tell us a little bit about what's next for you before we sort of close out the session. Obviously, you've written this book. Is there another book on the horizon? There is. What's next for you?
There's a couple things on the horizon. So I do executive coaching through Calgary or Alberta-based company. They're in BC as well, called Results. So I do executive coaching for larger company teams. So typically anywhere sort of from 30 million gross revenue to in the billions, quite frankly. It's all the same concepts, right? Good business concepts are good business concepts, right? So I'm working with, I take on about 4 or 5 clients for them, and I really enjoy that. And I still do the business training for EO, the accelerator program, and I do that for a few cities in North America. So these are my what I would call sort of give back to the entrepreneurial community. I try to, hopefully it's a give back, because my experience is good and bad, and hopefully people will take what they will from there, and it would help them enhance even just a little bit of what they're doing. Obviously continue to work with Vea, because we, again, enjoy helping businesses scale. And so they're all related to that. That's kind of a life passion. And then I do have another book. I actually wrote it prior to this one. But I shelved it when I came up with this idea, because I said, I think I can help more people with this one. So I shelved that one. I'm going to bring it back and I publish it next year. And so this one is a lot of leadership concepts and mindsets and around these pitfalls. So a lot to do with business. The other book is helping people define their own level of success. And the word success is so vague, and often people relate it to money and fame, right? Are the two things. And I disagree. By my experience and the network I have, success can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. It might mean that I have grown 2 healthy, happy, well-adjusted children to be, to go out in the world, and, these children are our next leaders, right? And that's successful. That's hugely successful. So especially nowadays, right? Who knows what's happening with kids? So it's really helping people develop what their own level of success looks like, and then some tools on developing themselves personally so that they can feel that they're working towards their own levels of success. So kind of one's a leadership mindset and the other one's a personal mindset book. So looking at publishing that next year, and believe it or not, much to my wife's chagrin, I do have another business idea that I'm investigating and modeling out. I can't speak to it a lot right now, but maybe look in the future. There might be another business that's spawning from all of this conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Nick, for joining us today. I've just put a screenshot of Nick's book up for you. So for those listening, check it out. If you Google Nick Thompson's name and look out, you're about to get S'd, you will be able to find his book, and you'll be able to learn from a lot of the pitfalls that he's come across in building and growing ventures. So do take note of those things. And thanks again, Nick, for sharing those insights. That's super helpful for those that are listening today, and you've been very honest and open with those. Join us also for our next session at noon Mountain Time on January 5th. We're going to be hosting Vern Harnish, the Scale Up guy, and Christine Burr to talk about Christine's scaling up story and journey, and how that went for her, and all the good, bad, and ugly things that we can also make sure we avoid as pitfalls. In terms of scaling up experts, thanks a lot for joining us today. This has been another episode of Scaling Up Experts, brought to you by Mount Royal University's Growth Catalyst program, where we explore the latest practices that help Canadian business leaders scale up and businesses grow. We delve deeper into the 7 scaling strategies with subject matter experts like Nick Thompson. So thanks again. The Growth Catalyst program, for those of you that like to learn more, go to growthcatalyst.ca. It's an intensive program designed to start the creation and set the foundation for executing a growth strategy by CEOs and senior leadership teams. So join us. Thank you to our funders, Alberta Innovate, Prairies Can, TD Ready Commitment, and Kathy and Bruce Williams Fund. And we look forward to you tuning in again for another session. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.